If you guys hear a lisp, please excuse that. I got Invisalign yesterday. I knew Invisalign was gonna hurt, but I didn't realize it was gonna hurt this much. I'm hoping that as the days go by, my lisp goes away. But today, I'm going to be reacting to your guys' controversial opinions. I've done this video twice before, and every time I always have a really fun time because you guys always bring such interesting, controversial, relevant topics. It's always a fun time to chat with you guys about these controversial topics, and I feel like it's just a bunch of different discussion videos smashed together in one. I always love to hear your guys' thoughts on these topics, so comment down below what are your guys' thoughts on some of the topics that you guys submitted. Thank you to everyone who submitted. I asked you guys over on my Instagram. I feel like there's just been a lot going on in the world in terms of politics and society. There's a lot to delve into, so let's go ahead and get started. First one is modern feminism is killing the world. Islamic feminism was always better. I think the older that I get, the more that I see a lot of the flaws in terms of mainstream feminism. I definitely think feminism as a political movement and a social movement has done good for women as a whole in a lot of ways. But I also think at the same time that there's a lot of glorification of feminism and this idea that the feminist movement has like solved all problems for all women everywhere. I think a lot of the times a huge issue that comes with mainstream feminism is the lack of intersectional feminism. So thinking about how feminist issues intersect with class and race and a lot of other factors. A lot of the times historically, I feel like especially in the US, feminist movements have been led by white women, and you've only really see white women as like the face of feminism when black women have really been the ones doing the work in terms of improving the condition of women of color in the US. And it's really disheartening to see as I have grown older, as I've studied feminism and feminist theory in college, and as I've just kind of gained a better understanding of like how the world works. Less and less I kind of idealize feminism as a political theory. I also think too, like feminism is not the solution to all, and I think a lot of the times when it comes to feminists, they can kind of see it as kind of the blanketed solution for all women despite kind of their positionality. Coming from an Islamic perspective, for example, I think a lot of the times there's this idea that you have to be a feminist, and this idea that feminism is what gave women their rights, was the first political movement that gave women women's rights. And there can be this huge lack of understanding of how Islam has expanded women's rights way before women's rights was even on the table. That doesn't mean that I don't completely agree with the idea of equality and gender equality and a lot of the things that feminism preaches, but I think as I get older, the less and less I idolize and just glorify and romanticize the ideals that feminism is supposed to kind of promote. I think there's a lot of reform that feminism kind of needs to undergo in order to be more intersectional and representative. I do think that it brings a lot of benefits to a lot of different people, but I don't necessarily think that it is a perfect political ideology or movement that necessarily liberates all women everywhere. Jubilee always has such interesting middle ground videos, and they have a bunch of videos on this, like feminist versus anti-feminist, and they always have just really interesting conversations. But I feel like even seeing kind of the discourse between both sides, you can see how different perspectives there are when it comes to this debate. I'd love to hear what you guys think. Sometimes a dictatorship or linear government is better for people than a democracy. As someone who lives in the US, I have always just grown up around this idea that democracy is the best form of government. The US likes to promote this idea of democracy being like the epitome of excellence when it comes to politics and government, when that's not really the case. I think if you even just like look at different cultures and societies and see how democracy from the West has been pushed on to a lot of Eastern countries, and a lot of the destruction that came out of that, you can see how destructive forcing a form of government is on another people that it's just not suited for. I just don't think that democracy necessarily works in all societies and cultures the same way it does in the US. And I think this American exceptionalist idea that we've been fed from a young age is that like everything, the way everything is run in the US and the way the US does everything is the best, when that's just not the case. It's really, really harmful to push this ideology, because you can even see just like how much of effect that has had on the Middle East and North Africa and a lot of countries in the East. I feel like a lot of the times when you're talking about this subject with people, there is not really a lot of room, and a lot of people just assume that if you don't believe in democracy for like every country, that you're automatically a communist or someone who believes in an authoritarian government in its most extreme form, when there's a lot of room in between in the conversation for other different forms of government. I think it's even something you see a lot in African countries, how these anocracies come about, these countries that seem like democracies on paper, but then in reality there is a lot of corruption, a lot of bribery, a lot of just political corruption that makes it not really function like a proper democracy should. Mauritania is a huge example of this. Mauritania is technically supposed to be a democracy, but it is the most far from a democracy, and I feel like there's a lot of political reform in the system that needs to happen. It's not a properly functioning democracy. Not every country is just suited to have a democratic structure to its political system, and that doesn't necessarily mean that some other form of an extreme government needs to be constructed in its stead. There's room for discussion and compromise, and room for envisioning a different political structure that can be best served for its people. I think when you're coming in as another country into a country that's been existing for years, that has its own politics, its own history, its own culture that's been going on for generations, to force your political system and your ideology onto those people and that culture, it's gonna inevitably create violence, which is what you see a lot in what has happened in Eastern countries and the wars that have kind of resulted in it. Someone else said, democracy is a tool used by the US to control the leadership of other countries. I definitely agree. I definitely think that the US has its hands in a lot of areas of this world that it should not have its hands in. The US causes a lot of destruction across the world, really under the guise of promoting democracy, when it's like there are so many other insidious reasons that the US has for infiltrating itself into other countries and other peoples. I think it's a really paternalistic mindset to believe that you as a Western country know better than the actual people that live on the land, and to impose your ideology on other people is just such a destructive mindset that the US uses every single day. It's really sad to live in a country where that is happening, but it is the reality, and I think it's important that conversations be had about that. Male Muslim podcasters. Male Muslim podcasters need their mics taken away. I think the older I get, the more that I understand the importance of knowing the privilege and the power that comes with having a voice and a presence on social media. Like, going onto social media and having an audience that you speak to, and the things that you post have an impact. One video, one post could change someone's life completely. It could change the way someone views the world. Especially young children and younger adults are so malleable, and when they come onto the internet and they see the things that their favorite creator is saying, that influences like their entire perspective on the world, and it has a huge impact on people's lives. And unfortunately, when the wrong people are given a platform, like some of the male Muslim podcasters that I've seen on the internet, it just creates a lot of negative impacts, I feel like, on young Muslims, on people's perceptions of what Islam is all about. I think this is especially seen on TikTok. Like, I cannot tell you the amount of times that I've been scrolling on TikTok trying to have a good time, and I see a clip of a male Muslim podcaster just saying the most vile things. And a lot of the times it's always male Muslim men. Oh my god, male Muslim men. Muslim men, male Muslim podcasters specifically. It's just like a genre, I feel like, of male Muslim men on the internet that are always just coming for women. It's like they always choose the most vile things to say about Muslim women, and I feel like they're always just constantly trying to tear down Muslim women in a way that is just so nefarious and so intentional. It's really sad, because what if this is someone's first perception or introduction to Islam, and the first thing they see about Islam or Muslim people are men coming onto the internet shaming women? The amount of male Muslim podcasters coming for the way that women wear their hijab is unacceptable. Who are you to talk? Who are you to come onto the internet and start talking about another woman? It's really sad because I feel like the internet is such an important place to correct a lot of the representation about Muslims, and is a great opportunity for people to discover Islam, and yet people are coming onto the internet and just spewing a lot of hatred and a lot of fear and a lot of negativity and creating a lot of division also within the Muslim community. I'm not saying all Muslim men are like this. I'm talking about a very specific demographic of male Muslim podcasters that come onto the internet and just say really, really outlandish things. It's been an epidemic, to say the least. It's interesting because you see it so overly represented when it comes to the Muslim male podcasters. You don't see these like Muslim female podcasters coming onto the internet and spewing all this hatred. I listen to so many Muslim podcasts, and I feel like a lot of the times when it comes to the female Muslim podcasts that I listen to, they're always centered around positive messaging, and I just feel like Muslim men need to take some notes. Can we please stop attacking each other on the internet? There are a lot of Muslim male creators that have a really positive voice and a positive influence that I've seen on the internet that I think are doing amazing things and are giving dawah. May Allah reward them for all of the good that they're doing for the ummah. But on the other hand, there are still that select few male Muslim podcasters that are just spewing a lot of hatred. And unfortunately, with how the internet works, the algorithm loves to push out the content that is negative, that is visceral, that is going to get more likes and shares. And so that is the type of media that we see overrepresented from the Muslim community. Unfortunately, it is a reality of how the internet works. I think the only way that we can kind of become better at just filtering through what is outlandish content and what is positive and healthy and real is just becoming better, healthier, more mindful consumers of the media, and just understanding that when you see someone coming onto the internet talking about a certain subject, they might not be qualified to be speaking about what they're speaking on, and just taking things from where they come, taking things with a grain of salt. Whenever I hear someone spill a controversial opinion or start talking about something that might be controversial or just say very outlandish things, I'm always keeping in mind where that's coming from, keeping in mind the source. That's what they teach us in school when it comes to the news and the media, the general mainstream media, is to always consider the source and where things are coming from. So do the same thing with social media, and I think it will create a healthier relationship, especially with the way that you consume information. Marrying someone with different political opinions. This is personally something I don't think I could do just because of my positionality. It would be really hard for me to marry a Republican. I don't think in any reality I would be able to do that. But I think people have different levels of how much they care about politics. Believe it or not, not everyone cares about politics. I feel like it's a huge privilege to not care about politics, but I guess there are people out there that don't care about politics. I definitely think that in any relationship there are going to be a list of things that are deal breakers, that if someone does or exhibits, that's it. Like, the relationship needs to be over because that's genuinely something that's important to you. And there are things that maybe you don't care about. Maybe you don't care about someone's finances. Maybe you don't care about someone's race or religion. You have to figure out for yourself if that is something that matters to you. And I feel like make that very clear from the beginning. For me, someone's political affiliation is important. Less so their political affiliation, but just kind of their political views. And I feel like there are certain political issues that I obviously care about a lot more than others. Your political perspective on the economy, not as important to me as other political issues. How you view law enforcement, how you view the US's role in Gaza. There are certain political issues that are more important than others. So I guess it's just finding what matters to you and if the person that you're going to be marrying fits that. Politics can be huge. Like, people don't realize how important politics is, but politics also reflects things that will affect your relationship. For example, your stance on guns. Are you comfortable with having guns in the home, or do you believe guns in the home should absolutely not be a thing? That's important because one day you guys are going to have a home together, and if your partner owns a gun and wants to keep a gun in the house, what are you going to say? What are you going to say? How about when kids come into the picture? It affects so many things. So I feel like politics, it just affects all aspects of life. Unfortunately, that is something that you kind of have to talk about. I mean, I think in general with my friendships, it hasn't been a huge thing. I haven't run into that issue. I feel like the people that I attract in my life typically have similar politics to me. We don't have exactly the same political opinions, but on the issues that truly matter, we do tend to have similar political opinions. Social media activism, not really sure it's wholly a good thing these days. I've talked about this topic a lot over on Disclaimers Aside. If you guys don't know, I have a podcast called Disclaimers Aside, and if you like this video, you guys definitely should check it out because I have a lot of podcast episodes kind of touching on a lot of these different topics. But it can be a good thing, it can be a bad thing. It really depends on how you engage with it. I feel like social media is such a powerful tool for mass communication and reaching people in a way that might not be possible with traditional media. You can access information a lot faster, you can spread information a lot faster. If there's a lack of information represented in mainstream media, that's a way you can fill the gap, is through social media. But at the same time, there are a lot of negative aspects that come with social media, including misinformation and also just performative activism as well. I think it's really, really hard, but I do think the good outweighs the bad. I think especially seeing the war in Gaza and the genocide that's happening is a huge example of how social media is an important tool. A lot of the videos and the coverage of what's actually happening in Gaza that's not being shown in mainstream media is being shown on social media, and that will serve as a record for future generations, and it'll go down in the history books of how mainstream media has been silent on it. Social media is so important because without social media we wouldn't have that. We wouldn't have access to that, and as a result there would be thousands and thousands of people that are just, actually millions of people that are just ignorant to what's happening. It's also a way that people can kind of politically organize as well on campuses. So it's an important tool. And I think you just have to focus on trying to minimize the bad, doing your part to not fall into performative activism. It's difficult. It's definitely hard. It's something that everyone struggles with. And even if you have good intentions, I think it's difficult to not fall into a trap of performative activism, but it's something that you can actively work on. Misinformation, same thing. That's something that social media companies can do a better job at doing. But I don't think that those two negative aspects outweigh all of the good that social media provides. AI is cool and all, but it shouldn't be implemented everywhere. With ChatGPT, AI, and the conversation of the ethics of AI is honestly so huge these days. Like it or not, AI is going to be a part of our lives for the rest of our lives. It's like when the internet came out, and it's just another tool. And I think that we just have to get better at detecting when plagiarism and things like copyright are happening. But at the same time, AI is a tool that can help our jobs all be more efficient. It can help us be more innovative. And if you are someone who refuses to use AI in your work, you are holding yourself back from reaching a new potential. I don't see AI as something that necessarily takes away from innovation. I see it as something that helps innovation. It's honestly a really, really helpful tool if you use it in the correct way and then you use it in an ethical way. The lack of coverage for African political conflicts. This is huge, and it's honestly something that I see a lot, especially on social media, because while I think social media is doing a lot of great things in terms of covering political conflicts and sharing information about certain issues that are not getting coverage, African conflicts and I feel like Black issues are always pushed to the side in every community. Even in the Muslim community, a lot of the times the Muslim community cares so much about Palestine, which is a good thing. I'm not saying that any of the commitments to Palestine take away from other conflicts, but I feel like a lot of the times there is no support for a lot of the political conflicts or issues that are affecting Black Muslims or Black Muslim countries or Muslim countries with Black populations. It's not like supporting one cause is going to take away from another. It's so important to understand what is happening in Congo, what's happening in Sudan, what's happening to Black communities, and what is happening to African countries I genuinely wholeheartedly believe that Africa as a whole is the continent that faced the brunt of colonialism and is still recovering from a lot of the effects of colonialism. A lot of African countries have only been released from the shackles of colonialism recently, and so a lot of the underdevelopment that is happening in African countries are a direct result of colonialism. There is a huge debt to Africa as a continent, and there are so many resources and so much opportunity that Africa had that was stolen by imperialism. The world has a debt to Africa and African countries. To me, it's crazy that something's happening or something's going on in an African country and the least you can do is be educated about it and maybe share about it and see how you can help. And a lot of people are just kind of turning a blind eye. Okay, this is the last one for today. Mixed weddings versus split. Is it wrong to want a mixed one? This is an interesting phenomenon that I honestly didn't know about until I went to college, because I don't think Mauritanian weddings, I guess maybe it depends on what tribe you're from, but growing up as a whole, I wasn't one that really went to a ton of weddings. I think I've been to like 2 weddings in my entire life. My parents aren't wedding people. I also didn't really grow up in the Mauritanian diasporic community, so I didn't really grow up going to a ton of weddings. I think that they tend to be, actually they may be separate. I think they're like separate but kind of like in the same venue, separate sections. But basically, if you haven't heard of the separate versus mixed wedding debate, it's in a lot of Muslim cultures. They will have weddings that are separated by gender. Sometimes they'll even have like weddings where it will be completely different venues, which is interesting because I've heard a lot of interesting stories where girls will go to separate weddings. They'll go to like an all-girls wedding, and then girls will like not be wearing their hijab and everything because it's all girls. But then there'll be like a male photographer or like a male DJ, or like the groom will walk in at some point. I'm like, how is that an all-girls wedding if you have a male DJ or photographer? Like, let's kind of add things up a little bit. I am not someone who wants like a huge wedding like that, but I feel like if I did want to throw a really big wedding like that, I would just want things to be mixed, because I feel like it's just easier to have everyone in one place and everyone together. And I feel like also like in the situation kind of, I know the wedding is not for the guests, but like, for example, imagine you invite a couple to your wedding who don't really know other people at the wedding, and they go and it's like separated by gender. They're just all of a sudden thrown into this wedding situation where they really don't know anyone. I feel like if you're someone who wants to have a separate wedding, do what you want. I think at the end of the day, the separate versus mixed, it should be all up to the bride and the groom, because the wedding is for the bride and the groom. And I think sometimes when it comes to wedding culture, we lose sight of that. I feel like there's so much extravagance and so many things that are done for the happiness of other people, when it should really be the happiness of the bride and groom that's prioritized in like all of the decision making. I'd love to hear your guys' thoughts on any of these topics. I hope you guys enjoyed today's video. Make sure to subscribe if you're not already subscribed, and check out my podcast, Disclaimers Aside. I will chat with you guys in my next video. Bye.